Once, something happened that I never expected. I took my husband to the doctor for his usual checkup, but instead of everything being fine, the doctor said something really serious. Dr. Lawrence looked very serious and told me something shocking about my husband. I felt really scared and couldn't believe what I was hearing. My husband, who I always looked after when he was sick, was now someone I was afraid of. The doctor even said I might need to keep away from him for my own safety. This made me feel really anxious and frightened. Hi, I'm Betty Frieden, and I've spent the last decade working at a big pharmaceutical company. It's like a second home to me, a place where I feel comfortable and like I belong. Even though I'm 50, I still work full-time, and my coworkers really respect me for it. Not many people my age are still working, but I've always enjoyed it. I think part of the reason I'm so dedicated to my job is because I didn't get married until 4 years ago. My boss, Gerald, and I are close, maybe because we're both single. Once he jokingly asked if I was ever going to tie the knot, but I knew he was just teasing. Around that time, I was seeing Richard secretly, who later became my husband. Richard's a bit older, was married before, and like me, he didn't want kids. We met through a matchmaking service for people looking for companionship in their later years. We decided to keep our relationship a secret, not telling anyone about our plans, even though our boss joked about marriage. Eventually, Richard and I quietly got married without any big ceremony, just signing papers at City Hall. I was surprised by how simple it all was, but I was really looking forward to our life together. But then, with Dr. Lawrence's worrying advice, I had to rethink everything. My caring feelings for my sick husband were now mixed up with fear and doubt. Dr. Lawrence's words kept playing in my head, telling me I needed to do something to stay safe. Standing there, trying to understand what was happening, I realized I had to make a decision, and quickly. Suddenly, the life I knew and the future I imagined felt uncertain. I'm LA, and my husband Richard works at a factory. Honestly, I make more money than he does. Richard got his job right after high school. As for me, I grew up in an orphanage and always wanted to be independent. That's why I didn't want to quit my job at the pharmaceutical company after we got married. I loved my job too much. When Richard and I got married, I told my manager Gerald right away. He congratulated me, but I could tell he had mixed feelings. Maybe he felt a bit lonely because his single buddy got married first. I tried joking with him about it, but he didn't seem to want to talk about it, so I dropped it. Despite Gerald's reaction, I was really happy about starting this new chapter with Richard. I imagined all the great things our future would bring. But reality wasn't as bright as I'd hoped. Life as newlyweds was pretty ordinary. Not much changed for me. I kept working, and the biggest change was moving to a more rural area and driving instead of taking the bus. Richard and I shared my old car because he didn't have one. About a year into our marriage, things started to get tough. Richard started showing signs of being depressed. He seemed different, barely eating breakfast, lost in thought, and even mixing up simple things like condiments. His clothes didn't match, and he became quieter both at work and at home. While I always admired Richard's quiet strength, his silence became too much, making it feel like I was living alone. This loneliness crept up on me as I noticed these small but important changes in him. I realized that Richard might be struggling with a mental health issue. Watching someone you care about struggle without knowing how to help is really tough. So I took Richard to a clinic that focuses on both mind and body health, where he was diagnosed with depression. I had a basic understanding of depression, but hearing the diagnosis made everything feel a bit darker. The doctor explained that the best way to deal with depression is to address its main cause directly. Finding the exact cause of Richard's depression was tough. He had been working at the same factory for years without any problems, and nothing major had changed in his job. If anything, I worried that maybe our marriage had something to do with it. But when we talked to the doctor, I told him we were happy together and couldn't see any obvious problems at home that might have caused Richard's depression. The doctor told us to come back if we noticed any changes or had any ideas about what might be causing it. But even after several visits to the clinic, we couldn't figure out why Richard was feeling so down. As time went on, his depression just got worse. On his worst days, he could hardly get out of bed. Sometimes he'd have headaches, or he'd call in sick to work. His appetite disappeared, and he noticeably lost weight. Eventually, he couldn't keep working and had to quit his job. Richard felt really guilty about relying on me financially, but I told him I was okay with it. My main concern was his health. It was hard to see him struggling so much, and I worried about him constantly, especially when I was at work. There was a scary moment when he got lost while out, which made me worry he might not just be dealing with depression, but maybe dementia too. This idea added to my stress. When coworkers asked how things were going, I had to admit that Richard wasn't getting better. Watching someone you love suffer so much without knowing how to help is really tough. One day, Gerald noticed I looked exhausted and gave me an energy drink. Drinking it made me feel a bit better, and I was touched by his support. He reminded me that we're all in this together, and his words nearly made me cry. With everything going on with Richard, I hadn't realized how much stress I'd been carrying. I realized I had to hold myself together, or I might fall apart too. So I focused on my work, trying to keep some normalcy in our lives. A year passed, and things with Richard didn't get better. They actually got worse. As our third wedding anniversary neared, I couldn't see any hope for his condition. Then one morning, I noticed our car was missing. I checked again, but it was definitely gone. Since Richard's diagnosis, I was the only one who drove it, and I hadn't used it since the day before, so it should have been at home. Worried, I asked Richard if he knew anything about where the car might be. He casually mentioned he thought it was there when he got home yesterday. I remembered he had gone out for a bit while I was at work. The doctor had suggested he try walking or jogging to help him cope. If the car was there when he came back, it must have disappeared sometime during the night. With the car gone, I had no choice but to use public transport, which made me about 10 minutes late for work. I told Gerald about the missing car, and although he understood it, he was puzzled too. He wondered if Richard might have taken it, but I didn't think so, considering Richard's condition and how he avoided driving since he got sick. It just didn't add up. Despite Richard's memory lapses and mood swings, I couldn't imagine him being behind the missing car. The car mystery added another layer of complexity to our already difficult situation. As soon as I realized the car was gone, I reported it to the police, hoping it would be found soon. But deep down, I worried it might be gone for good. And if that wasn't enough, something else strange happened on the day I was supposed to get my paycheck. I went to the bank and found my personal account was empty. I was shocked. We did have a shared account, which I checked next, only to find it was empty too. I was completely puzzled. Richard and I shared a joint account, but he didn't have access to my personal account and he didn't know its PIN. Yet, somehow, all our savings were gone. I felt a cold shock wash over me, and when I got home, I confronted Richard. I asked him if he knew anything about the missing money from our joint account. He seemed genuinely confused and denied knowing anything about it. Because of his depression, I hesitated to push him further, worried it might make things worse for him. Richard looked distant, lost in one of his frequent dazes caused by his condition. I couldn't help but wonder if he could have taken the money without realizing it. Planning to discuss this with the police, I felt overwhelmed by the double blow of losing both our car and our savings. The financial strain was tough, especially since I didn't have family to fall back on. With the small community clinic unable to provide enough help for Richard, we decided to switch him to a larger hospital with more resources. They gave us a referral letter, so we took a taxi to our first appointment at the general hospital. The whole experience was new and a bit scary for me, and I felt uneasy throughout the journey. Richard stayed quiet, lost in his thoughts as we arrived at the hospital. Taking a deep breath, I walked in and handed over the referral letter at the reception, expecting a wait. The general hospital was bustling with patients, each waiting for their turn. After about an hour, Richard was called in for his consultation. While he went inside, I took out a book to pass the time. But hardly had Richard entered the doctor's office when a nurse approached me. "Excuse me, are you Mrs. Simmons?" she asked. I confirmed, and she said the doctor wanted to see me. Familiar with discussing Richard's condition, I assumed it was a routine matter and followed her, though with some anxiety. The nurse led me to a different room, where a doctor, about 10 years older than me with graying hair and a gentle manner, greeted me. Before I could even sit down, I asked if this was about Richard's condition. He nodded seriously, and I braced myself for potential bad news. The doctor's next words caught me completely off guard. He advised me to keep my distance from my husband, revealing that Richard had been arrested for fraud a decade ago. My mind was racing with confusion. Why was this coming up now, during a routine medical visit? The doctor explained his suspicions about Richard's depression, suggesting that he might be faking it. He recalled recognizing Richard from a surgery 10 years back. where he had treated a deep cut on Richard's leg. It was a shock. I had thought we were addressing Richard's mental health, only to uncover his hidden past and a potential deception about his current condition. This unexpected revelation left me stunned, trying to reconcile the caring husband I knew with the person the doctor described. When the doctor mentioned recognizing a large scar on Richard's right leg, everything clicked into place. I knew about the scar but never knew how he got it, as Richard had never mentioned it. Finding out that the doctor before me was the one who had treated Richard's injury years ago felt like an unbelievable twist of fate. The doctor's revelation continued, unveiling that Richard had injured himself during a confrontation with his former wife, stemming from his fraudulent actions against her. He had stolen her luxury possessions and money. Shockingly, he had even pretended to have dementia during that period, tricking his wife into lowering her guard before committing the fraud. This repeated behavior of feigning illness to aid his deception was horrifying. Learning about Richard's criminal history and his arrest was overwhelming. I hadn't investigated Richard's past before marrying him. Having been alone for most of my life, I was just grateful to find someone willing to be my partner. The doctor's grave warning that Richard could pose a threat to me sent shivers down my spine. There was a gravity in his tone that made it clear this was a serious issue. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. I had been deceived. In the days that followed, I struggled to maintain a facade of normalcy around Richard while secretly plotting my next moves. I made the decision to install surveillance cameras throughout our home to monitor Richard's actions when I wasn't present. About a week later, I noticed that a watch and bag were missing. Upon reviewing the footage from the cameras, I saw Richard leaving the house with them and returning later with a stack of cash, looking oddly pleased with himself. His behavior didn't match that of someone suffering from depression. This footage confirmed my worst suspicions. Richard was responsible for stealing my belongings, the car, and our savings. Confronted with undeniable evidence of his deceit, I felt crushed. Richard had lied to me and manipulated me, betraying the trust I had placed in him. It became clear that I needed to take significant action against someone who had pretended to be vulnerable and in need of care, only to exploit my compassion and generosity. The realization that Richard had betrayed my trust was agonizing. I had devoted myself to working and caring for what I believed was an ailing partner. Divorce seemed like too feeble a response to the profound deceit I had endured. It was evident that we needed to go our separate ways. But I desired more than just a mere separation. I wanted Richard to fully grasp the seriousness of his actions and to rectify the harm he had caused. With a heavy heart and tears threatening to spill, I gathered the divorce papers and meticulously completed them with all the necessary details. The next day, feigning normalcy, I informed Richard that I needed to step out briefly. I had already arranged to take a day off from work, explaining the urgency of my situation to my understanding employer, who had granted me the sudden leave. At the police station, I presented my case, displaying the footage I had captured of Richard's deception to the officers. Initially, they seemed hesitant to take action based solely on the video evidence. However, after confirming with the pawn shop where Richard had sold the stolen items and tracking down my car being sold as a used vehicle, the evidence against him began to accumulate. It was also discovered that he had illegally accessed my bank accounts, raising suspicions about his purported depression. As the truth came to light, I was flooded with a complex mix of relief and sorrow. The police decided to move swiftly given Richard's criminal history, and they prepared to arrest him. Upon returning home with the officers in the early afternoon, I found Richard there, visibly taken aback by my unexpected return and the presence of the police. Despite the divorce papers clutched in my hand, his focus remained on the officers as one of them announced his arrest for fraud. Richard attempted to protest, citing his depression as a defense, but I knew better. The doctor from the general hospital had already cast doubt on the legitimacy of his claims regarding his mental health condition. In that pivotal moment, as the weight of both the legal repercussions and the dissolution of our marriage settled on him, Richard's facade began to crumble. Choosing this course of action was agonizing but essential to safeguard myself and pursue justice for the betrayal and manipulation I had endured. At the police station, my sudden eruption of emotion caught even the officers off guard, but it seemed to finally pierce through Richard's veneer of composure. As the police placed him in handcuffs, Richard's facade of defiance cracked. He appeared defeated, his bravado replaced by frustration as he was escorted away. Observing the scene unfold, I felt strangely detached, as though I were watching the unraveling of someone else's life. Since the doctor's sobering warning, reality had felt distorted. Yet here I stood, confronting the stark truth of my circumstances, determined to forge ahead from the chaos Richard had wrought. Witnessing Richard being escorted away by the police felt surreal, akin to a scene from a dream. This moment marked a significant turning point, offering a glimpse of a return to the life I had known before the tumult of marriage consumed it. While a sense of relief washed over me, knowing I would no longer be ensnared in Richard's manipulative grasp, it was followed by a wave of loneliness. After waiting over 47 years to marry, the prospect of solitude once again loomed over my newfound liberation. 2 months later, our divorce was officially finalized. The process had been slightly delayed due to Richard's arrest, but as everything became official, my emotions had settled, allowing me to reflect on our shared history with clarity. Richard's future was uncertain, facing imprisonment for his second offense. I could only hope that this experience would prompt him to genuinely reconsider his choices. In the aftermath of our marriage, which had disintegrated into nothing more than a disillusioning memory, I found myself contemplating my next steps during a simple lunch at work. It was then that my boss, Gerald, approached, casually making a remark as he joined me with his store-bought hot dog lunch. "I think you'd be just fine if you were with me," he said, almost casually. His words caught me off guard, and it took a moment for their full weight to sink in, leaving me momentarily flustered. "Yes, I'm serious," he added, noticing my hesitation, his tone smooth yet sincere. I was left speechless, my lunch momentarily forgotten, as I processed his proposition. Gerald then returned to work, leaving me to mull over his unexpected offer. In the days that followed, the thought of a romantic relationship with Gerald hadn't crossed my mind, yet I couldn't ignore the care and stability he had consistently shown me. His dependable presence and responsible demeanor suddenly seemed to shine in a new light. Despite my initial surprise as I continued eating, the possibilities Gerald had introduced began to take root, hinting at a future I hadn't dared to consider until now. The idea of inviting Gerald out for a meal after work ignited a warmth within me, sparking a glimmer of hope for what lay ahead. Perhaps this was the perfect moment to embark on a fresh journey, exploring the potential for happiness and companionship once again. Stepping out of my comfort zone and into a new beginning with someone who had always been kind and supportive felt both exhilarating and reassuring. Tonight, I resolved, could mark the beginning of something wonderful and new.